Hello viewers, and welcome yet again to another episode of Dinner Guide. I'm your host Chef Andy, and today, just as we did for the previous and the next episodes, we're going to be focusing on some Mediterranean inspired recipes. With this mentioned, I'm also going to be showing you one particularly on this episode that is both Tuscan and Mediterranean inspired. But before we begin, just to give you an idea of what to expect, we'll begin by introducing the ingredients before us. So from the very front, I've got half an imported lemon, about a tablespoon of some sun-dried tomatoes, about 2 tablespoons of olive oil, about 30 grams of feta cheese, and 2 small-sized limes. You'll also require 1 medium-sized red onion and some basil leaves, some Italian cannelloni beans, some beautiful cherry tomatoes, and some tinned tuna, but chunky variety preferably. You'll also require some fresh coriander and some fresh rocket, about 3 slices of white bread. You'll also require a small bowl of some lettuce, some Kalamata black olives that are already pitted, some salt and pepper to season with, and that will be among the ingredients that we'll be focusing on today. But before we begin, we'll allow you this chance to freshen up, grab your pens and papers if you're taking notes for this recipe, and we'll see you after a very short while. Welcome back viewers. If you missed out on the introduction to the show today, we're going to be working on a very simple Tuscan tuna salad. And now just to bring you back to scratch with the ingredients, as I mentioned, we are going to be blending some Tuscan and some Mediterranean ingredients, which of course means a nice beautiful touch of Italian will be particularly present for this simple recipe. But before we begin, we'll begin by slicing up some white bread on the side. So I'm going to begin by slicing off the crust, which we will not be using for this salad. Proceed to remove each side evenly using a sharp knife. And you can reserve those trimmings. You can also give those to your little ones if they're running around your kitchen. And of course, you can still also be able to use those for very, very many other uses. All right, so once those are sliced, begin by slicing them diagonally and spreading them on the surface of your board. And to that, we'll very simply drizzle over some olive oil. And this particularly gives it a nice, beautiful aroma. Also gives it a nice, beautiful, enriched flavor. So using your hands, just proceed to rub a bit of olive oil on the top side of your pieces and proceed to turn over. Of course, tucking them closer together will allow for you to get as much of your olive oil on the surface without drizzling any on your board. And of course, also limits any particular waste. Right, so proceed to pat your olive oil right over the surface of your pieces of bread. And once done, proceed to grind over some black peppercorns, proceeding to do so for both sides of your toast. And these we will proceed to grill very, very briefly on a griddle pan. Of course, the advantage of using this does give it a nice, beautiful color mark. So be sure to spread those onto a hot pan. Will allow those to continue toasting for anywhere between 2 to 3 minutes on each side. You can proceed to clean your board at this stage. And proceed to turn over. Now next we're going to begin by incorporating some of the ingredients, but of course, very importantly, when you're making a salad, very important to always have your dressing ready. So we're going to begin by just that. Right, so to that, I will proceed by adding about half a tablespoon of some olive oil. We'll also squeeze in about half a lemon's worth of juice. Be sure to also have a nice clear bowl or very good bowl for making your dressing with. And of course, also make arrangements to have a whisk which you'll be using to whip your mixture. Once that is done, small crush of some peppercorns, and of course a pinch of salt to taste. And proceed to whip that together. And this should take you anywhere between a minute to a minute and a half. Particularly for this recipe, very important to also have a nice portion of oil to your mixture. So I'm just going to drizzle in a bit more olive oil, just to fix a consistency. And this should bring you to a very much colored yellow mixture. And once that's combined and yellow in color, it should actually begin to almost coagulate at this stage, giving you a nice silky smooth dressing for your salad. And we'll proceed to reserve that on the side for a little later, bringing your attention back to your toast. So proceed to turn those over. And at this stage, since your pan is quite hot, proceed to turn off your heat completely and allow for the second step of cooking at a very, very low heat temperature. So as you can see from the cameras, nice beautiful colors from the griddle pan. We will proceed to move those onto a board on the side. Right, so using a pair of tongs, once colored, you can proceed to move those onto your board, allowing them to stop cooking for this particular stage. And an addition to your salad with a bit of bread always also gives it a nice, beautiful, complementary feel. And of course, that beautiful richness of the dressing and the sharpness of all those flavors particularly balances very well when you have a bit of a salad with a bit of some bread on the side. You can also alternatively serve that with a bit of bread rolls, with a bit of garlic, also a very good Mediterranean touch to your dish. Right, so toast is done. We'll begin next up by slicing up our olives. So I'm just going to take about a tablespoon from my martini glass. Right, next up we'll proceed to slice those into some nice workable chunks. And this particularly helps with a bit of an appeal of appearance, and it also helps you to go that extra mile with saving up on ingredients. And if I haven't mentioned as well, this particularly is a very good salad, especially if you're looking at combining some pantry items, particularly those that you don't use on the regular. So this particularly will give you that extra ability. Right, so we'll begin by moving our olives onto a board, into a bowl. And next up, I'll proceed to slice my red onion very, very thinly. This, of course, you can only achieve by using a very sharp knife. So proceed to do so until you have about 5 to 6 slices of your red onion. You can also be able to achieve some nice, very, very thin slices by using a mandolin, if you have one available to you. And just one more slice just to finish off. And now one particular thing to mention, onions are particularly very pungent in flavor and of course in touch, but you can always make this a little easier for your eyes and also easier to work with by incorporating those into your dressing a little earlier. And just tossing them in there will allow for the onion to absorb the flavors, also reduces the pungency of your onion. And of course that will also aid in giving a bit of flavor. Right, so your onions are in. Next up we'll proceed to slice up our cherry tomatoes. So I'm just going to grab a few pieces and proceed to slice off the stem end and proceed to slice those into halves. And you can incorporate those into your bowl with the olives. Now these are particularly very amazing, especially in salads. They carry a nice, beautiful, pungent juice to them. They also have a nice, beautiful sweetness that will cut the richness of the feta and the saltiness of the dressing. Right, you can discard the rest after that. Next, proceed to grab your cherry tomatoes. And we'll be using about 3 slices of those. Proceed to slice those very thinly. Something also to share about this recipe, very good with protein nutrients. Also very good with a bit of lettuce that does, of course, give you a nice, beautiful balance of water and of course balances your sugar intake. A nice beautiful addition of feta as well brings a nice beautiful flavor to your salad and brings a nice authentic Tuscan feel to it as well. So be sure to pick the best quality feta cheese for this recipe. So we're going to slice those into some sizable chunks. Of course, reserving some that we will be crumbling over the salad a little later. So you can reserve some of that. Next up, proceed to add your cannelloni beans. You can alternatively use gazpacho beans for this particular recipe, but if you can't be able to find those, you should be able to find some beautiful cannelloni beans in your retail stores. All right, so your beans are in, your cherry tomatoes and your olives are in there. Next up, we'll proceed to add our tuna. And I'm using tinned tuna, but be sure to always go for the olive oil or the oil preserved variety. Those particularly come to be very tasty and a little more nutritious. But of course, to mention, they do also cost a little bit more than the ones soaked in water. But very important to always remember, if you are going to be working with tuna, be sure to make a point of draining your liquid completely. Same for any particular beans that are purchased in tins. Remember, the liquid is not particularly consumable, and this is particularly used just to preserve the mixture. So be sure to always drain those and rinse them under some cold running water in your sink. This should be able to get that iodine flavor off the beans and of course give you a nice beautiful mixture to work with. So very simply, we're going to proceed to incorporate the rest of our ingredients. So I'm just going to tear up just a bit of my arugula and my mixed lettuce. Of course, tearing them into nice chunky sizes. Proceed to also pinch off some of your basil leaves. And basil particularly brings a nice beautiful balance of flavor, and it also incorporates a nice beautiful peppery finish to your dish. So proceed to do so to the very end. You can also alternatively chop those very thinly, but always be sure to try and get as much stem pieces away from your leaves as always, because those tend to be very chewy. Right, so we've got most of our ingredients in there. We will proceed to season our salad very simply by adding some salt, and some black peppercorns, crushed of course. And you can use a slotted spoon at this stage to toss all your ingredients in your bowl. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the final part of this particular second part of the show. We are going to proceed to finish this very simple dish in a very little while, but we will allow you to take this break, refresh yourselves, and when we do come back, I'll take you through the last and final step of plating, and I will also share some beautiful healthy tips that some of you may actually be able to learn from on this particular show. So please don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If you're just catching up with the show, we've just finished introducing the ingredients. We've also prepared some of the condiments and the salad before us, but we're right at the last and final step of plating. Now for this particular process, begin very simply by discarding your whisk and of course scoop out your onions from the dressing that you made a little earlier. By this particular stage, they've been soaking for anywhere between 4 minutes and 6 minutes, which means they've actually managed to absorb a lot of flavors and of course pungented down a little less. Right, now very simply begin by grabbing a pair of tongs and we will begin to plate our salad very briefly. But before we do so, I'm going to begin by lining my plate with a bit of our beautiful toasted crostinis, and we'll proceed to pour our salad right at the center of the bowl, of course always allowing for the salad to pour out very, very gently from the plate, or rather from your bowl of choice. Will of course give your salad quite a bit of a height, and it also aids in plating a more fresher looking dish. But very important to mention, always be sure to give it a proper mix before you begin to pour out your mixture. Right, simple as that. Once that's done, of course, very important to incorporate a bit of your dressing. So I'm just going to mix that with a spoon and drizzle that right over the salad. About 3 to 4 tablespoons should do. And that will, of course, continue to drip down to the very bottom of the salad very, very briefly. Now, just to finish that off, we are going to beef up our presentation by just adding a bit of some lettuce right over the top. Remember, this is more fresher, a bit more crispier, and it hasn't been sitting in any particular dressing to this point. So it will actually give it a nice, more fresher, more crisper touch. And you can proceed to just place your 3 extra slices on the side, of course lining them with the corner of the bowl. And you can finish your salad very simply by adding a few more pieces of your olives. You can also add about 3 to 4 pieces of your cherry tomato, and of course finish very, very lightly by adding a bit of your coriander on the side. We're just going to pinch those off the stems. So about 3 or 4 pieces should do for this recipe. And of course, very important, a bit of a lemon wedge or a lime wedge on the side will always allow for you to be able to refresh your salad very, very simply. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the last and final part of the show. I hope you've managed to learn something new and fresh for your salad preparation. And as I mentioned at the beginning, these are particularly most of the ingredients that some of you may always have lagging in your refrigerator or in your pantry. This is a very particularly simple way to get rid of them. And as I also like to mention, you can also alternatively use some stale bread, but you can always just dry that off in the oven, drizzle some olive oil and some herbs on it. It will actually bring a nice, beautiful, refreshing crunch to your salad. And you can also alternatively use some garbanzo beans in placement of the cannelloni beans, which are of course very Italian. You can also alternate some of the ingredients such as your cherry tomatoes with some fresh large sized tomatoes as well. But very important to mention, the smaller tomatoes are particularly more juicier, more richer in flavor, and they actually bring a nice beautiful color to your plate. For the olives as well, I particularly chose pitted olives for this recipe because it does also become very tedious to try and pull out the pips from your olives when you're having your salad. So that will of course save you quite a bit of time and also bring some nice beautiful touch to your dish. But for that, I have come to the last and final part of the show. I will also remind you that you can also air your comments, your queries, or any particular issues to us through our Facebook page. That's BrandPlus TV Kenya. And if you have missed out on this particular episode, do not worry. You can be able to recap on this on our YouTube page. That's BrandPlus TV Kenya as well. And you can be able to find out a bit more of some of the work we've done in the past and also refresh yourselves with what you missed out in the previous episodes. But I will bid you farewell at this stage, wishing you God's blessings, and until the next episode, do have a lovely evening and see you soon.